Welcome everyone to CTM Day 9 and our panel, Dismantling Western Bias in Music Software and Music Education. My name is Dahlia. I'm running the music department at the DAWs Artists in Berlin program, and I am extremely excited to host this session today. In this panel, we will discuss the inherent cultural biases in digital and electronic music making tools, as well as the dominant gesture and position of Western music theory, which go hand in hand. Starting point for the discussion is the new music software Apotome that successfully launched last week during CTM. And this application is a direct answer to the dominance of the Western tuning system, the equal temperament, and is basically allowing musicians to explore microtonal tuning systems and their subsets. And therefore, we will start with a short introduction to Apotome and the process of developing this tool before we will then broaden the field and discuss the manifold connected questions of decolonizing music technology and music education. Please feel free to interact with the panelists and write your questions in the YouTube chat anytime. The CTM team will pass them on to me and I'll integrate them in our conversation. On this panel, I am talking to Matana Roberts, Deena Abdelwahed, Tero Parviainen, and Khyam Allami. Warm welcome to all of you. Matana Roberts is an internationally renowned composer, musician, saxophonist, band leader, sound experimentalist, and multimedia practitioner. She works in many contexts and mediums, including improvisation, dance, poetry, and theater. And she's probably best known for her acclaimed multi-chapter project Coin, in which she explores various pathways of US American history and trauma. Among many prizes and awards, Matana was awarded a DAWs fellowship in 2019 and is based in Berlin since. And I'm super happy that you also join us today for this panel. Thanks for being here. Also, part of the panel is Deena Abdelwahed. She's a musician and producer with Tunisian roots, now based in Toulouse. She was trained as jazz singer and performer and is known for her unique blend of bass music, techno, and vocals. Deena was one of the 3 musicians who were invited to explore the new software Apotome and create a video performance for CTM. And the performances were streamed this Tuesday already during the festival. And the outcome was incredibly diverse and fantastic. I hope many of you could see that, and you can still see the results on YouTube and the CTM channel. And Deena, you seem to have a lot of fun during your amazing set, and I'm curious to hear more about your process today. Thanks for joining. Sure. And in addition, I welcome Tero Parviainen, who is one half of the creative studio Counterpoint, together with Samuel Diggins. They are working on the intersections of design, music, and technology using generative systems, interactivity, and artificial intelligence. Counterpoint joined forces with Khyam Allami, the 4th guest on our panel, to develop Apotome and its sister application Lima. Tero will share some light on the development process from his perspective as a coder. Lastly, I would like to introduce and welcome Khyam Allami, which feels almost redundant in front of this audience, but anyway, Khyam is a multi-instrumentalist, musician, composer, researcher, and the founder of the label Nava Recordings. In his artistic research, he focuses on the development of contemporary and experimental practice based on the fundamentals of Arabic music with a focus on tuning and microtonality. The trilogy of software applications, Lima, and Apotome, are resulting from Khyam's ongoing research about these topics. And as I said, the last one, Apotome, was just successfully launched at CTM. So congratulations to this great start to both of you, Tero and Khyam, and thank you for being here with us today. So for everyone who missed your lecture on Tuesday, Khyam, and who didn't have the chance to dig into this application, which is now accessible online on the CTM website, could you, for a start, sum up what this application is about?
Yeah, thank you for the kind introductions, and thanks to everybody else for being here with us. It's really a pleasure to be talking with all of you. Apotome is a transcultural generative music making environment, and focused on the idea of microtonal tuning systems and their subsets. And it's built in tandem and designed to be used in tandem with this sister application Lima, which is a tool for exploring, studying, researching, hearing, and creating different tuning systems, whether it be the ones that are already available in the database, which is constantly being updated, or creating one's own and trying to discover new tonalities and new things. Like you mentioned, this application is a result of my research, and I'm in the middle of doing an artistic research-based PhD. It's a practice-based PhD in composition, focused on creating contemporary experimental Arabic music. And one of the main cultural identifiers of Arabic music is its tonality systems, which are all microtonal. And I've always struggled to feel a sense of freedom in my creative practice because all the technologies that we all rely on today are so limited in scope to equal temperament. I'm an oud player, and I could just stick to playing the oud, but I don't agree with the idea that just because I play a traditional or ethnic instrument that I somehow should be unable to interact with the tools that everybody else is being able to work with. And I know many friends who have the same issues and the same desires. And so I initially created these tools as a means for me to be able to explore my artistic practice. But as the ideas developed, and when I got in touch with Tero and Samuel, and we started talking about the possibilities of using the new novel web audio and web MIDI capabilities that have been around for the last few years, all of a sudden, the ideas opened up even more. And the fact that Apotome and Lima are both browser-based made a lot of sense to me, particularly from the perspective of opening them up for educational use and for creative use. And Tero will tell you a little bit more about the development process, but we've always had research, education, and creative exploration in mind on equal levels at the same time. And the guiding principle, I guess, here is to make these ideas and these tools accessible to people so that they can learn about these things, untrain their ears, discover new things, and at the same time, try to make them visually pleasing so that even musicians who don't necessarily have an understanding of this subject or have ever come across it in the past can not feel intimidated by the way that this topic is often represented.
Yes, thank you, Khyam, for this short introduction. Maybe Tero, you can add from your perspective something about the development process, like how, when did you team up with Khyam? I mean, this must have been years ago somehow, I don't know. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your collaboration also.
Thank you, definitely, yeah. We started, I think, almost 2 years ago now, actually. It was in 2019 when we met up in London to speak about these ideas. And I have a very different background, I think, to most of the people on this panel, where I don't really have a musical education or a musical background in any kind of proper sense. I kind of play around with things, and I kind of specialize in building music technology. And I kind of jumped at the chance of kind of doing this, both me and Sam did, because we kind of have this sense of responsibility in that if you look at how people are making music these days, it is first and foremost technology-based music making. A lot of people, such as myself, don't really kind of get a music education in any other sense than learning how to use tools such as Ableton Live and whatever to make music with. And the kind of theory underlying the kind of music that we make is not really present in the conversations we have, except in how it's embodied in the tools that we use. Like every tool that we use kind of encodes some music theory in it, and that is to the tool's user the way music works. So like every tool kind of, it's become two things have become coupled together: music theory and the technology with which you make music. So people often say that, you know, I don't know anything about music theory, I just do stuff. I don't think that's quite true. It's, you know how to use your piano roll and your step sequencer and whatever you use, and those things are expressions of a certain kind of music theory. So then, as someone who makes these tools, it's important to me to think a little bit about, okay, if this tool encodes a theory of music, well, which one? Whose music theory is it? Why is it that one and not something else? And I guess we all know the kind of usual answer to these questions, and that's why we are kind of here talking about these things. But I think I feel like I owe it to myself to kind of at least think about that. And, you know, why do I make the decisions I make as a designer of a tool, and kind of not have those be so automatic as they often are. And kind of this is where we came from to this project. And not knowing much about this world, I kind of taught myself a lot about it by building this thing, and it's been very rewarding.
Yes, thank you. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on the specific challenges building a tool like this, because you're very, your expertise is rich, like developing music tools and like designing music software. So what were the specific challenges in this process?
I think the biggest challenges we've had and why we spent so long on this is mostly about how we present these things to people who use this tool. Like how does a tuning system look like, and how do you interact with it, and things like that. And that's what we kind of work and rework across the 2 years. What was kind of maybe surprising is that the kind of main idea behind these tools is to make music with microtonal tuning systems, and that happens to be like technically the easiest part of the whole process, really. Like when you have a synthesizer and you say to it play some pitch, it's just a frequency number in hertz, and there's nothing special about Western 12-tone equal temperament that is somehow easier to tell it to play than anything else. So we spent maybe of these 2 years, maybe like 5 hours making that work. It's just so easy. But then again, that is the kind of question that's easy to solve in the context of a single tool. But where it gets more tricky, and what I think we should talk about today a little bit, is like, because music technology is such an interconnected ecosystem where tools need to understand each other, and there are certain protocols that they understand each other with. Solving the problem of kind of unraveling some of these encoded biases is not something any individual developer can really solve in a broader sense, because you have to make the next tool in the chain also understand what you're doing, because musicians want to use everything that's available to them.
Yes, thank you so much. Matana, I was wondering now, because Khyam also referred to this tool as an educational tool, like potential educational tool. Could you imagine using a tool like that in your classes, or like does this connect to your teaching at all, or is?
Well, first, I just would like to add, thank you for the wonderful introduction, but I'm not based in Berlin. This is a temporary state of being, and I just want to make sure that that's documented and not to confuse people. I'm so grateful.
That's my wishful thinking.
No, I want it to be, but I need to help my country. So it's something that I'm thinking about a lot as I try to get stronger here. You know, my teaching is very unusual and experimental in terms of sharing information. So I could see myself possibly, I could definitely see myself using this software. I don't teach in a way where I push things onto the students that I work with, because up until this moment, the students that I've worked with are mostly graduate level, PhD, students who already have a mode of understanding that they're trying to follow. But the idea is awareness and making people aware of these other histories that are moving alongside the histories that they're following. So I could see so much usefulness in just trying to share the information and let them know that, you know, this is available to you. This is a mode also of thinking that is available. And it's just hard to, what I feel in learning music, you, at least in the US, you learn so many internalized imperialist modes of thinking about sound that you don't even realize that you're internalizing. And it's a lot to unpack. And so I see a tool like this very helpful in allowing not only students I might teach, but myself even to unpack. I still have very internalized notions of imperialist whiteness, otherness that is quite toxic just from being in those environments.
Can I just jump in on that? I feel absolutely the same way as you, Matana. One of the most difficult things for me throughout this whole process has been to continuously check in with myself and re-critique every single step of the way. Me and Tero have had, like, you know, immensely long email exchanges about all the various little details, because like Tero said, the technicality of this was incredibly easy, but actually distilling this toxicness, as you put it, which I feel is somehow some kind of infection, is incredibly difficult because it's so ingrained. I want to actually just apologize and call myself out, because even in the video tutorial that I made, I was talking about the global toolbar and I just said the master toolbar. I mean, these small things of terminology, of ways of thinking, they're so ingrained in us that it's so hard to pull out of. And it really is a lot to unpack, and it really does take time. And I, you know, Tero really helped me see a lot of things, and I'm sure that the input I gave really helped Tero see a lot of things. But it is such a web that trying to get through it is something that really takes a lot of time and a lot of self-critique and perseverance.
Yes, because technology can really, it really shows the chasm that exists between all the isms that separate people, particularly with what is going on, what is still going on in the US right now, as far as I'm concerned. But what we saw on January 6th, for instance, it was a very good representation of this wide chasm between true information versus false information used over these technological tools. So how can that, you know, the fact that you even thought about the word master in the way that you did shows an awareness that other people just would not have. But I think the more of us that continue to challenge ourselves about those thoughts, the better the world will become in the end. That's what I hope for.
Great, thanks. Deena, you already worked with this tool, and we saw your video performance on Tuesday, which was obviously great fun. Like, maybe you can tell us a bit about the like, how did it feel to dig into this tool? How was your work process for this performance?
Okay, the first thing that I did is that I started to try everything, put on and off stuff, and put numbers and all of that without any idea in my mind first, in order to understand a bit Apotome. Khyam helped me a lot kind of he introduced me to each part of Apotome, what it does what. And then let's say I am actually I don't have music theory basis or whatever, and actually let's say I had to come back to some I don't know, to revisit a bit the basis of Arabic music and the scales of in Arabic music, let's say, because I know it, but I don't have the names for it. I know it, but I don't know what is it exactly. So I see some scales, and then I just choose one, and I started to play. And sometimes it rings a bell, sometimes it was very experimental. And the thing is that I'm now at this time, nothing is odd for me, nothing is weird for me, nothing is by default for me. So anything that you would put me in my ear, I don't know. Maybe I developed something, some kind of ear in order to get everything. Anyway, so later on, Khyam also gave me some hints about the basis of scales in Arabic music, the subscale and all of that, and the technique de jeu, how to practice, the practice, how it is played, the intervals, musical intervals that I hear. And then I started to play. I had super fun, actually. I would say I had even more fun off camera. And everything rang a bell. So I started to actually say, okay, for example, I love Abdul Halim Hafiz, and then Khyam, what's that scale, you know? And then I put it, and that's how I actually remember the different scales that are in the list, and that's how I did. I let's say I put my favorite scales, since they are out of my favorite Arabic old songs, and I improvised on it. So actually, they were in my live set. It was not actual songs. It was improvisation upon stuff that I remember from my childhood or from my mind. Apart from some Islamic song, but that I couldn't improvise out of naturally. We cannot improvise when it's around religion, apparently. We stick like this. Bon, bref, anyway, voilà, that's
So you had a rather intuitive access to this tool as it was meant. You know, yeah, when I understood you right, you wanted this tool to be easily accessible and an intuitive like exploration of tools, even if you have no clue of music theory, of which music theory whatsoever. So that's actually nice to hear. And will you use this further on? Like, is there something you would apply to your music production process in the future?
For me?
Yeah.
Surely, of course. I already use comma from
okay.
Okay. And no, I actually I am certainly going to use Apotome as already generative music. It's true that I didn't. I know that it exists already, the generative music, but it was so boring for me. You know, because when generative music, of course, is equal temperament and sequencer very equal, so it's very boring for me. Now with the Apotome, my interest got back to generative music, and it's actually like cheating for me a bit, because it's actually makes you things in your place, let's say. Yeah, so no, certainly I would use Apotome and Lima in the future.
I should add a quick point in Deena's favor, because she won't mention it herself, but we started working together on a different project, and I introduced her to Khyam, and we talked a little bit about microtonality and the different tunings in the Arab system. But then she actually, you know, out of her own desire, called a few friends from Tunisia and had a few sessions with them to inquire about the different maqams, the different modes, and to just, you know, revisit the Arabic music theory, like she said, in order to give herself a bit of a grounding. And what I found incredibly exciting about that was that these tools actually sparked this desire, they built upon the desire that Deena already has in her work. But so far, she's really focused on exploring a lot. And I don't want to talk in her place. This is my feeling. Listening to Deena's music, I felt like she was exploring the rhythmic elements of Tunisian music and North African music a lot, but not so much the melodic. And then when this tool came about for her, I felt like these songs from her past and this subconscious was somehow stimulated, and this is what got me very excited. And I just, you know, pulled my hands back and let her do whatever she was doing. And whenever she would write to me with a question, I would be excited to respond back. But this, for me, was the beautiful part. Was, you know, we as Arabic cultural practitioners, let's say, so many of us have a strong link with our culture. And when we try to engage with it in the modern world, it's so wrapped in nostalgia or this museum style presentation that, you know, you must play an acoustic instrument, you must play traditional forms, you must learn the traditional theory, and you have to do all of these things. And the fact that now this is opened up and someone like Deena can just turn up and play and figure out her way and re-spark that interest and move forward, this has been absolutely, for me, like I feel like already we've made a huge achievement, you know. And I think Deena really doesn't give herself the credit for the amount of effort she made to get in on that. Sorry to jump in.
Yes. No, but maybe I would also like, all right, if yeah, melodically saying, since I don't have any basis in music theory, let's say I wanted to visit it, but with my voice. So every time, if you listen to my music before, every time if I want to make something melodic, it's with my voice. And as Khyam said, and the people that know how I sing, they say every time you are super shy when it's recorded in the studio, because I am a bit not doing it not with confidence, you know, because when I listen to the notes when it's in synthesizer or the DAW, and when I listen to it, there is like some little microtonality not together. Since I didn't understand before, I said, okay, it's my fault. I am the one who's error. But oh my God, with the ear, my ear says something, and what I see is something else. So I went to the rhythmic parts. And I developed also some kind of how can I say workflow also in the rhythmic parts, because it is also very westernized feel when we talk about the rhythmic parts of making music in a computer and using technology as well. So yeah, it's a big construction site, let's say, and it's not as intuitive as I thought it would be when I started making electronic dance music. All I wanted is having fun, actually. All I wanted is to make people dance. And it's true that when you don't know anything, you just want to have fun, and you download crack the DAWs, you intuitively, automatically, you go to westernize the music, which is house and techno. If you want to do something else, all the fun will drop. Everything will be sophisticated and all of that. And yeah, so let's say Khyam opened one thing in electronic music, let's say.
Yeah,
That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I also see a really big achievement in these applications, absolutely. And you pointed out, as well as Tero and Khyam did before, to this intimidation that comes with Western music theory. And maybe we could discuss this a little bit, because I know a lot of musicians that think you're only a proper musician once you know about music theory, which is equal with Western music theory. Once you know how to read notes, and once you understand like the counterpoint and all, like the circle of fifth, and when you understood this, you are like you are a real musician. And this is still so so in place, this intimidation that like working around this, it seems to be very hard. I don't know, maybe the musicians can tell me a bit about their experience also in education. I don't know how your students feel about that, Matana, for example.
So again, for me, how to explain myself, because again, I've worked in these very untraditional areas of education, but I come from a background, and my interest in my own music has a lot to do about music as an oral tradition, right? And so as an oral tradition, music theory is studied in a particular way that's internalized by the, how do we say, the primacy of the ear to the voice. And I grew up around elder musicians who could not read music, but could play in ways that almost couldn't even be put on paper. It was so beautiful. Or some of the Americana musics that I pull into the Coin work, for instance, come from this idea of music being for everyone, and how people, like there are these sing-alongs on the Coin records, and they're there on purpose to celebrate singing just to sing, and not necessarily having any training to do it, or singing being used as some sort of community or work push. And my interest in graphic scoring has a lot to do with making music available for people who are not able to sit under the strictures of Western music theory. Now, I say all that to say that I also really have a fondness of some of that theory, and that it's beautifully pieced together, you know, the steps and all of these things. But it has also created this wall that has created a bias against otherness of other perspectives. And just hearing Deena talk about, you know, the program as a tool had me thinking a lot about hip hop, for instance, sampling culture, really interesting looks at like Southern hip hop, for instance, that, you know, you had people using machines that they weren't really sure how to use. But once you get a hold of a program, or once you get a hold of a machine, and once you start to sort of personify it, you know, the saxophone is a machine. The saxophone is a program, really. So once you begin to, it's just super old school, but once you begin to learn like the small details of it, there's a whole other world that opens up. Or thinking about playing instruments as a kid. And when I first had the saxophone, I didn't know what to do with that thing, but I knew that I loved the sound of that instrument. I knew that I wanted to do something with that instrument, right? So I just think I try to toe kind of a moderate line of, there's a beautiful history. Western music theory does have a beautiful history. And a lot of people suffered to create it even, you know, read any biography of any early composer, and you're like, wow, even though, you know, lots of women were left out, where were the people of color? They were somewhere creating their own music that wasn't, you know, being held up to the standards of, you know, this kind of colonialist aesthetic. So I sort of go back, but I encourage any students that I come across into understanding that it's not about the tools, And I say this because someone had to say this to me. She said, you know, it's not about the tools that you're using to create your music, it's about your vision. And when your vision is set, everything else falls into place. So I think about it like that. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was beautifully put, and it's really important also to see that the music theory itself is not to be blamed, and you know, like that's not the evil part of this whole story, and there's a lot to explore. And yeah, I think that one of the bad parts is that it is taught as if it would be something like very complicated to understand, like that. Only when you're like really superior in your musical skills, you will eventually understand like this high building of like, this is how I was taught music theory in our musicology department, and this is how I know from a lot of people how they are taught music theory and conservatories. And this is it's just not true, because it's, in the end, as you say, it's like a tool, and it's like any software, whatever you explore, you just have to learn it, and then you know it, and it's, you know, it's doable, and then you can play with it. Yeah, but maybe Khyam, you would like to add something to this.
Yeah, I just want to pick up, I guess, on Matana's point about knowledge. And I think the issue here, obviously, we're not here to bash Western music theory or you know, say we're adamantly against equal temperament or the use of it. That's not the point. I think the point here is choice and accessibility. And what Tero brought up earlier about the way that technological tools need to speak to each other also means we need to keep in mind the chain of things that happen. And also to pick up on Matana's point about hip hop, for me, some of the most exciting moments in hip hop started happening when producers started playing beats in themselves. And we have this concept of the pocket, finding the pocket of a particular beat, of a particular groove. And for me, all of that work always really inspired me, because I always felt like, well, I want to find the pocket, but of the melodies rather than of the grooves and of the rhythms. And I guess because we can react and we can feel rhythmic, micro-rhythmic changes, so these very minuscule differences in time when something is being played, it's easier for us to engage with the idea of groove and feeling. But it's exactly the same principle that is applied in microtonality, but because sometimes the differences in tonality are so subtle, it's quite difficult for people to perceive them, unless you have something extreme like, I don't know, the Indonesian gamelan systems, or even the Arabic neutral thirds, these like very particular intervals that stand out, you know. But that moment when hip hop producers were starting to play and they found their own groove, then all of a sudden the culture starts being represented in a different way. The break beats that were being used in samples stop being such a rigid representation of that rhythmic idea. Things started to feel better, you know. And when you listen to all the live music recordings that were sampled, even in, you know, the feeling, the grooves that are in them, that is culture. Like, and trying to find that balance within the pitch world, like within the melodic world, is I guess what was my drive. But also to bounce back of another point that Matana made about vision. I agree, of course, it shouldn't be about the tools. It should be about one's desire. But the problem that I had was I had this burning desire, and I've had it for over 20 years, and the tools were not allowing it. So there was a block. And when that block is there and you don't have the perseverance to try and go through it and find a solution, then you probably will end up veering somewhere else, just like Deena mentioned earlier. And sorry, go ahead, Matana.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But you still, to me, had such an amazing vision. The fact that there was a block there, as horrible as that was and should not have happened to you or anyone, it still allowed for you to look at what you've done now. It's incredible. I just want to add that, but I agree with you 200% with what you're saying.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, that's just like, I've met so many musicians who have had this desire, and what I realized quite late on in this whole process, and it's something that me and Tero talked about quite a lot, was this isn't about having an end goal in mind and having the tools to be able to realize that end goal. This is about allowing artists who have a different relationship with pitch material to actually open up these tools and not have a clue about what they want to do, but have the freedom to choose. Right? I think that choice and the knowledge that the knowledge sharing that needs to come with that ability is what's really important here, and that's why the education element for us was so was so parallel, because we knew that we could have let these tools out into the world 2 years ago in a very simple way and go, oh, this is it, it works, it does what it's supposed to do. But actually communicating it and providing the contextual information, including in talks like this, where we open up the debate and the discourse to something a little bit more extra musical, I think is equally valid, if not more so.
Yeah, in addition to this discussion right now, there's a question from the chat I would like to pass on. Matana says it's not about the tools, it's about the vision. Isn't that antithetical to this whole project? Isn't the point of Apotome to say that the tools matter deeply?
Who should answer that? Should I answer that? What?
Yeah, I think I kind of already answered that or mentioned it without knowing the question from earlier. And I think already Matana responded, but Matana, feel free to add.
No, I come from a very specific background where I just think a lot about, I'm very proud of the culture that I come from, that is a representation, at least from an American perspective, as being treated as scraps, people being treated as scraps, people being treated as not even human, you know, not even seen as human, and yet still continuing to create monumentous creativity from these so-called scraps. So I see challenge. I've hated the challenges that I've had to go through, and I'm conservatory trained technically, but I had a horrible time in these places, partly for the same reasons that you are explaining. I was told by Western music professors that I had that my music had no value, that my vision was not needed, you know? And it's only from the traditions that I come from and from the family that I come from that I have an understanding to always question the quote unquote master voice or the quote unquote leading voice. And I think everybody here has a really deep understanding of that.
Yes, thank you. I would like to go back to the developer's perspective and Tero, because this is a really rare opportunity to get some insight into this process, which is mostly hidden for the non-coders amongst us, like me. So the connectedness and the accessibility in this tool is something that you aim for, and is something like connectedness to other tools. I would like to know how difficult it was to implement that into a tool like this one, and yeah, maybe the other question afterwards.
Yeah, so with these two tools, we wanted to not just have something you can use to explore these different tuning systems and cultures within themselves, but also connect them to whatever else other gear you have around, software or synthesizers or whatever. And so what we wanted essentially to enable is to let you play these instruments with MIDI, which is the lingua franca of how music technology speaks to each other. And Khyam had this previous knowledge of like basically a hack of doing this within the MIDI protocol, which is not something it was designed to do, but there's kind of this loophole in it that lets you do it, which is to, well, MIDI as the protocol is designed for Western equal temperament. The numbers in it are numbers that denote the Western 12-tone equal temperament notes. But what you can do with a MIDI instrument, if you have one, you know there's like this pitch bend wheel at the end of it that lets you bend the note higher or lower when you press the key. What we do with Lima and Apotome is to kind of automate the process of bending that wheel just a little bit to achieve the exact frequency that whatever tuning system you're playing is in. So we kind of are using MIDI in a kind of brilliant way, I may say, because I didn't come up with it, which is that you kind of do something with the protocol that it wasn't designed to do to achieve what you want to do. And that allows us to connect to any instrument that you have. So it doesn't, the instruments that you connect to it don't have to understand particular tuning systems or anything like that. And what's also remarkable about that whole thing is that it was also one of the easier parts of the project. It's not particularly difficult to achieve this with the technology. So it's kind of latent in all the tech we have around to do this kind of thing. And that's, I guess, one of the things we wanted to highlight with this project is that you have a web browser on your computer. All you have to do is plug it into Ableton or a synthesizer, and you're off. You can just start doing music.
Thank you. There's another question to you as a developer from the chat. Do you think the system controls in music software are present in many other parts of our societies?
System, sorry, can you say that again?
Do you think the system controls in music software are present in many other parts of our societies? So is this, I read it that way, that is it like, is this control system in music software, this grid that you want to overcome, is applicable or valid in other parts of our societies also, from a developer's perspective?
I think most definitely, yeah. So much of modern life is technology driven. We communicate currently over Zoom, and we do everything mediated by technology, which gives a tremendous amount of power and responsibility to the people who make that technology. It's everywhere. And music is a good example of that. We have all these kind of built-in assumptions in music technology that we all kind of, who use that technology, then have to kind of bend our own expression around. And that is the case everywhere, definitely. Like the way Twitter is designed, for example, shapes the way we communicate, and also what we communicate about, because it kind of gives rise to a certain kind of style of communication. And that then has, as we all know, large consequences on what happens in the world.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. Maybe at this point, you can also tell us something about the other music-related projects you design as a coder. Like you do a lot with AI also, and maybe there are some parallels also to this these questions right now in working with AI in music projects.
Yeah, this is true. We do some of that. In this project, we kind of wanted to stay away from that, just because there isn't, like, AI is a tool that to me requires a certain kind of problem that you solve with it, and whereas in this project we just don't have an AI-shaped problem. So we are all about the musician and the person using the tool. But yeah, we do some sort of machine learning projects as well, and these same assumptions that we have in all music technology certainly exist there. So most any say generative machine learning model that deals with music is trained on a very large data set of 100% Western popular music or classical music. And furthermore, the way the data is encoded in these models is pre-assumes that. So there is actually no way to even give it any other type of music, because it's not compatible with how the data is encoded. And it's not exclusively that, but overwhelmingly that's what it is, and certainly that then also formats what you can do with those tools.
Yeah, interesting, because this also adds to what Khyam proposes, that there's a lack of freedom in these tools, actually. And while in the past decades, many people were talking about like the new freedom and democratization of music through digitalization and through the accessibility with like computer music, and in this realm of experimental music, like leaving all these like grids behind us. You now like say that on the other hand, technology really like locks us off from this freedom we should achieve, actually. So I would be curious to hear from the musicians here how you feel about this interplay between like the freedom of music technology on the one hand, like the digitalization on the one hand, and like the grids within these tools that yeah, I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Deena.
Yeah. Well, what what I feel actually as a musician who is doing a music that rotates over making music from the computer and making music that is synthesized, that it's not coming from traditional instruments. Yes, I feel like I put my hand on fire, let's say, in order that I want to make a music that I would like to make that is actually intuitive music. Like you take an instrument, like for example a darbuka, and then there is dumtak, and then there is the ornaments around it, the silence in it, and all of that makes the groove. I want to work on that with a sequencer or a drum machine that has a sequencer with a kick, snare, tom 1, tom 2, and I want to make something that I wanted, for the drum machine to speak out the intuitive music that I would like to enhance, or to that process is as I said earlier, I thought it would be fun, but it's fun, but later on when I arrive, when I can find a solution, and or how can I say, around like Khyam did, for example, or as you said, the beach band, for example, in order
a workaround.
A workaround, exactly. And it is actually, I understand now, for example, the Arab producers, those who can have the how can I say, the luxury, those who can have a computer and a mouse and a DAW in their computer. As I said earlier, the natural way of things goes to making music out of that, is making Western music, so techno and house and so on. And I understand that how much dedication you have to put if you want to make music that is from your country or from your surrounding, or identifies you. And yeah, I feel like we in a way we have extra job to do in order to express ourselves and our identity and where we come from and our cultural backgrounds. And yes, in this case, I feel like the technology somehow, it is easy, but for some people with some cultural background, and for other people is actually even more handicapped than it is. I don't know how to say it. Maybe I'm sure that there is a better way to say it. I hope that people understood me. but it feels like women in sports or handicapped people in sports. The guy goes, and then the woman, she has the kid, she had, I don't know, and everything is, you know what I mean? There's much more challenges. And yeah, so that is how I feel with music and technology and music of today. Voila.
No, that was amazing. And I'd like to bounce off that a little bit in that I side-eye the word freedom and always have, because it's, at least from my understanding, when that word is brought up, you always have to add whose freedoms, what freedoms, you know, why the freedoms, you know, to try to have an understanding of what that means in music. And looking at technology, for instance, like looking at just simple social media applications, for instance, the shadow banning that's going on Instagram, the algorithm on Twitter and these other applications that are setting a certain pace of understanding that is still leaving out so many people. And so there used to be a time, a long time ago, because now I do work with a lot of different technological tools, especially in the one-woman work that I create, where I was very anti it. I wasn't a Luddite, but I was still like, you know, the saxophone, this is what I do, or this oral tradition, this is what I do. And it was the wonderful pianist Vijay Iyer who said something to me about, you have to understand these tools that people are trying to use to replace you in order to have a better understanding of them, and also the own tools that you choose to use. And it's almost the same of like understanding a debate style, like in terms of understanding someone else's point of view. You actually have to get in there and really understand, be able to debate from their point of view and your point of view, to have a deeper understanding of your own point of view. So it's, I see these tools and this talk about technology, you know, for all of us as a freedom, as still very hopeful. But there's so many isms that are still encapsulated inside of these freedoms that we should be able to experience with these tools, but it's not happening. And I actually don't know what to do about it. I'd be curious to know what others.
I'd like to pick up on something that Matana mentioned earlier about the idea of identity and culture and a certain kind of background. Like when you grow up hearing a certain kind of music, it embeds itself in your subconscious, right? And you build this library, internal library of references, subconscious references to music. And I guess for me and Matana, because we both also play acoustic instruments, then our relationship with music making is probably quite different to Deena, for example, or any of the other young people in the world today who don't play instruments. They're just programming and using the technologies as that's their in point. We probably have a different relationship to these identities and these cultures, right? But I think back, it makes me think back to in the 70s when the synthesizer was first being introduced into the Arab world. The early synthesizers allowed you to microtune each, to do octave repeating tunings, particularly the farfisa organ. There's a thing in the Arab world, everybody refers today to any digital keyboard or any keyboard or synthesizer as an org. And this comes from these farfisa electric organ synthesizers that were made in the 70s that allowed you to actually microtune. And what happened in that period, which a very short time, I would say like between 74 and 78, is that Arabic music just like did this leap of tonality and richness and colors and sounds that that was facilitated by the fact that musicians could tune the thing. And we're talking about composers like Baligh Hamdi, who really like reinvented the sound world of Arabic music and gave us a new kind of input into this library. And post that, once digital synthesizers came in that were much more rigid with their tuning systems, and once this like fake quarter tone Arabic system started being imposed in the synthesizers, our ears ended up being somehow also colonized by this mediated version of what the technology what the technology was capable of doing. And so for me, as somebody that wants to create an experimental Arabic music, I don't have references like in my internal database that can inspire me to create something like that based on this system's ideas, or these microtonalities, these subtle details. Whereas if I want, so I end up relying on so many other cultures' outputs, and particularly European and American cultures, in order to build up these ideas. And again, there's this friction, there's a conflict of, well, I love the work of Anthony Braxton, and I love the work of Terry Riley, and I love the work of so many other composers, Shostakovich, Stockhausen, whoever, but something about that doesn't quite represent me. So where is the thing that represents me? And trying to find a source for that was always difficult. All of a sudden now, once I had these tools at my disposal, like the amount of doors that opened up, hearing the way Slickback and Wahono and Deena use these tools to represent their own different cultures and ideas was just fascinating. So I think what we're on the cusp of right now is being actually to be able to create these new inputs that go into our subconscious that can help us revitalize these cultures and create new ideas. Because this isn't about challenging only Western culture and Western music theory and equal temperament. It's also about challenging our own identities and our own cultures, because they are equally as traditionalist and rigid. So that was a long way around, just to say that it's this interlink of cultural background is, for me, incredibly poignant.
If I may add to that speaking as someone who comes from Finland, where the 12-tone equal temperament is the ambient kind of the thing that you are barely even aware of anything else, something like Lima, where you may listen to that next to something else, is tremendously valuable, because then you kind of start to understand that on a deeper level, where you can compare it to something else that didn't arrive at the same place. And even if you're only ever interested in a single cultural tuning system, or for example, 12-tone one that I come from, there's so much value in hearing it in the grander context of other things that also exist, because then you see it from a new light.
Yes, absolutely. There's another question from the chat talking about the isms that we can't really overcome. Don't you think it's hard to escape capitalism by redesigning digital music tools? Is the question.
Tero, you want to jump in on that?
It's a big one. I think, yes, there is certainly a kind of process going on where music technology is the kind of music technology that gets made is the kind of music technology that people think people will buy and what will make money for them. And then what because people make a certain kind of music technology, they think that's the only one that people will buy. So there's the kind of self-fulfilling prophecy there, I think. With Lima and Apotome, we kind of sidestepped that whole issue by making these tools free, so we are not like they're not commercially oriented tools in the same sense. Although we hope maybe that people who do commercially work on these things will pick up the ideas that we have put forward in this. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I've struggled with this consistently in the past when speaking to software manufacturers or designers in the past, that without having some kind of economic incentive, there seems to be no desire to do this thing. And I made that quote also in my presentation that was broadcast on Tuesday, that even initially when MIDI was created, it was created as a digital language that would allow equipment to communicate with each other in order to allow for a wider market. So the driving factor behind it was economic, and it was this idea of growth, that once we have this thing that allows different units to communicate to each other, it means that we can all, as different manufacturers, work independently and create our own things, but anybody can use them all in one. And this idea that certain markets are valid and certain markets are not, especially when it comes to thinking about musical culture and pushing things forward. Most manufacturers pride themselves on the fact that they create new tools because they allow musicians new capabilities. And the fact that tuning, which is the fundamental, most basic thing of music, has never really been considered or implemented, to me is just like, I just don't understand it. I really don't. I mean, even though it was implemented in MIDI, but it's there in the technology, but it wasn't implemented by the manufacturers and the designers. And this is the conflict. So the all of the isms here are in friction somehow with each other, because the predominant thought process is about market and economics, but there's no reason why you can't develop a market based on a particular idea. I mean, Yamaha did it, and Roland did it by creating synthesizers that were designed for the Arab market, which had these little buttons on there where when you press one, it would reduce a particular equal tempered semitone down into a quarter tone. And these were specifically created for the Middle Eastern market, and they still sell today. They're still being manufactured, they're still being done. But it has implemented this Western perspective of what Arab music is, which is 24 equal quarter tones, which it is not, right? So again, like there's this push and pull all the time. And yeah, I mean, I could just go on, sorry.
Yes, thank you. There's another question. I think you talked about that in the very beginning briefly. Maybe you could just quickly answer. There's someone asking why you chose to make a tool for making generative music rather than a more traditional production software.
The idea here again is about challenging identities and perception. So and it also refers back to the idea of the subconscious library. For all of us who are musicians that play acoustic instruments, we all plateau at one point and suffer from muscle memory rigidity. Like we build certain ways of playing, and that becomes inherent in the way that we pick up our instrument and do something intuitively. And sometimes that we have to push ourselves very hard to get out of that muscle memory and that ear memory and find new things and different ways of expressing ourselves. And I think the same thing happens with electronic music tools. You know, you'll dial in certain sounds because those are the ones that you like, and those are your ones you're familiar with. You'll program certain kind of beats because those are the ones that you're accustomed to. And what generative allows is you still have control to shape and to define the probabilistic environment, but it can do things that you don't expect. So it can break the rules for you. It can help you hear something differently than what you would have played or created it yourself. And I think for me, this was a key point that goes back to what I was saying earlier. This is about challenging everything. It's not just about challenging equal temperament. By being able to pull up an accurately tuned Arab maqam and hear it being played with interval jumps that I'm not used to hearing allows me to have a different aural reference in my subconscious that can then inspire a new idea. It's not that the tool itself can produce the music that I want to do, but it can at least kind of give my inner ear a cleaning out, you know, and help me hear something else, even if it's a bit ugly, even if it's a bit unexpected, even if it's dissonant. Having those cobwebs shaken up and some fresh air come in, I think, is what can be incredibly powerful for us, especially those of us who are trying to challenge the rigidity of our own cultures and traditional local idioms, let's say. So that's why generative was this, that's why I decided I would like to have this generative environment.
From my point of view, there's another angle to that as well. Speaking as someone who's relatively unskilled in composition, this kind of tool allows me to kind of tinker and get to somewhere relatively satisfying fairly quickly without necessarily understanding too much about what's going on. That understanding can build up later, but I can already have an engaging relationship with the music when it's making itself, and I can kind of play with it. So it's much more approachable for someone like me in that sense.
One of the driving forces is the idea of being able to capture people's imagination. I'm sure, Matana, you have had those moments when you're teaching where you have a student that, you know, you say something and you see a little spark in their eye and you want to try and capture that moment and engage them in a different, whatever, it like deepen that feeling and that process. I guess for me, this was a driving force to allow people to be able to tinker and create something that might capture their imagination, and then let them think about analyzing, you know, and learning and developing something else. I don't know if Matana, that's I kind of implied something in your place. I didn't mean to.
Oh no. It's been a while since I've seen that one-to-one transference. But I know that I exist today as I am because someone saw that one-to-one transference of, oh, I'm understanding, and then also begin to understand this whole sonic world that I had no idea I would have any access to. Just brings up all sorts of questions, fascinating questions around the hopefulness of what you're talking about. Just, you know, that inspired spark that keeps creativity going. I remember some years ago reading about a woman who had written an entire music opus, having no idea about Western notation or how to write music in that way. But again, having an understanding of vision and having that initial spark that someone transferred to her in the same way that the tools that you're talking about will do. But I guess I do remember quite well the first spark that I had as a developing musician of just understanding what practice could do. Like, oh, wow, okay, practice. Like if I had a teacher who was, who gave me a really hard time because I was copying other musicians next to me as we were playing, you know, in an ensemble. And she singled us all out and had each of us play the part by ourselves. And I, of course, couldn't do it. And she yelled at me pretty good. And I went home and I practiced every day. And I came back and I was able to play it. And you're like, right, this is what, you know, this is what it takes. That's the spark that has began a whole travail of experiences for me.
Yes, thank you. There's another question to the development of the tool. Do you plan to make a MIDI effect version of Lima or Apotome besides the web browser-based version?
We have no concrete plans, but that's certainly something possible. And I think we are referring to something that would actually live in the DAW in Ableton or somewhere else. Yes, we could do that. Although I should say that the kind of things you would do with that, you can already do what we have, because you can get the MIDI out and you can route it to the rest of your setup in whatever DAW you're using.
Well, I'm looking at the time, so we just have another 10 minutes left, and I would like to ask kind of a closing question, since I understand music as one of the most versatile artistic mediums that we have, and it's so like its character is so like airy and fluid, and it's so changeable, and And so flexible, and that's why it can easily adapt to all the like social and political changes and so on. And we can explore manifold identities by using music as a medium. And at the same time, music education, and like music theory or musicology or whatever, is amongst all art educations the most conservative and static and westernized education programs, and it gets even more normalized by these technologies and these tools, as we learn today. So Apotome is a really hopeful step towards like opening up this experience. And I would like to know from you, how could you imagine a hopeful future for music education? Like, what's your vision of like the ideal state of music education at conservatories, and why do you think, is it just not changing, or like why are conservatories not willing to do these steps?
Well, I know that there are a lot of people trying to challenge this now and find new ways. Philip Ewell, who brought up a lot of this subject last summer, is about to start working on a book. I know that in the UK there's a couple of new working groups that are trying to let's say like readjust the way that these ideas are being presented. I would love to see a music education that is that breaks out of the monoculture that we have at the moment. That would be my ideal dream. I mean, this is why I went to study ethnomusicology. I never wanted to study. I love music, and I wanted to be a professional, but I never wanted to go study classical music. And I wasn't really interested in jazz, and I wasn't interested in pop music. I didn't want to go to a drum school and learn how to be a session drummer. I wanted to do something. You know, I grew up playing punk rock drums and in DIY punk and metal bands, and I wanted to do something that would help me express myself. And in the end, I ended up, because I started to find this balance in my culture, I ended up going to study ethnomusicology, because I thought, well, this is the closest I can get to studying all these different kinds of music in the world. And it was the most enriching experience for me, like studying Indian tabla for 2 years, studying Indonesian gamelan, learning about Japanese music and Azerbaijani music and Iranian music, and doing all the research myself was just so eye-opening. And it makes you understand that despite of our cultural differences, we can actually find so much unity, so much commonality within the difference. We are so often presented this idea of commonality and unification based on our similarities, and the differences are kind of always sidelined. But for me, it's always been the opposite. Like, as an Iraqi, I wish that I had grown up being able to speak Kurdish and be able to speak Iranian and being able to speak Turkish, because those are our neighboring countries. And I feel envious of places like Switzerland or Belgium, where 2-3 languages is part and parcel of lifestyle. And I don't see why music education can't be like that. Why is everything monoculture? Why is it always Western classical music or Western musicals? I grew up also in London, so I was forced to like spoon-fed the West Side Story and whatever. Like, why can't we learn about African American music? Why can't we learn about African music from across the entire continent? Why can't we learn a little bit about what Indian music is? Why can't we learn about these incredible compositional techniques that they use in traditional Korean music that are totally mind-blowing? There's so much richness out there that it's a difficult thing for educators to embark on, but I think that there are enough experts in the world out there who can pull together their resources to create curriculums that can engage in these ideas. And I think a tool like Lima, particularly more than Apotome, will help be able to facilitate this immediate engagement with tonalities and being able to hear the differences in different musical cultures, accents and dialects.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree, and I would love to see that kind of music education, but only the fact that ethnomusicology is not musicology, you know, that there's such a thing like musicology, and then we have the rest, which is like compiled in ethnomusicology, expresses like the westernization of this education, like the music education worldwide, because like if you go to a conservatory in Bolivia and you study music history, you study like Western European music history and not the music history of Bolivia, which is absurd, but it's just a fact, you know.
It just goes to show that again, like this rigidity and these remnants of colonialist and imperialist projections, right, are all there. And this is the unpacking that we were talking about earlier. You know, we all need to unpack this, no matter where we come from, because we all suffer from it. You know, if I was to unpack the like British colonialist imperialist baggage that I grew up with, then I also have to unpack the Iraqi problematic racist tribalist baggage that is, you know, all around us. And then you have to unpack this Arab nationalist problem, and it's just so many layers. But that's why, you know, we need to be having these kinds of conversations. We need to be creating these kinds of tools, and we need to be able to share these concepts so that we can actually have a discourse and clear the table, right, and understand exactly what the hell we're dealing with. Otherwise, I don't feel we're ever going to be able to move forward, because if we're always relying on this inherited knowledge without ever critiquing it, and by that I mean evaluating it, then we're always going to be somehow tied to the past, right? For me, in a negative way. I don't mean that in terms of the richness of tradition.
Yeah, I want to bounce on there. There are many educators who are working very hard on the behalf of trying to change the narrative. But what is not happening in these conservatory environments from my experience, though I did have some wonderful professors in these institutions who got it, is that history is not being shared. The colonialist history that sits within the, you know, the saxophone is an instrument that was created for marching bands. Marching bands are military bands. Like you never learn about that until much later, you know, or just how, I mean, jazz history and jazz historians have tried to do somewhat of a better job of doing that, but still students of color in particular, or even non-students of color who wish to be allies are being indoctrinated with this really steep, white-dominated inner self-hatred. And the way that sits within a student of color, I can tell you, I mean, I'm in my 40s now, and I'm still trying to unpack that, as well as unpack these other things that come from my own community that are also really problematic, and then just try to find a through line in there. And you go, well, you know, I'm not going to live to 100, so I need to find some way in there to survive, to recognize the history that's not being shared, but also still have some of the joy that comes from sound, that comes from creating, that comes from the power of what music can do for so many people across so many backgrounds and differences. So I have a lot of hope for education of the future in this way.
That's great. Maybe that's a very nice closing sentence, also a hopeful sentence. I'm also really hopeful, and I think that's the best achievement of Apotome, that it's not only pointing out to like the bias that's there, but it's also like providing us with an answer, with like a constructive and positive solution. Like one of the many solutions we need, but it's one of the steps we need to do. So thank you very much for that again, and congratulations to this launch, and thank you all very much for this inspiring conversation and for sharing your thoughts with us. Everyone out there in the YouTube channel, you can switch to the Discord channel and meet Deena, Tero, and Khyam there. Matana will have to leave now.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave as well because I have a rehearsal. We have to
All
prepare
right,
for the
there's
live show.
also a performance going on tonight.
I can jump in later and look back if anybody wants to ask any questions.
But the three of us will be in the Discord channel. Thank you all for watching and enjoy the rest of this CTM performance night.